All right, welcome everybody. It is week 568 of the COVID era. We'll have a great event today. Hopefully you're here on time, an hour early from our normal time. We appreciate the folks at the Association of Secular Elected Officials making some time for us and accommodating us only an hour outside of our usual time. You know, scheduling events like this is challenging because availability of so many speakers is really hard, and we've got a great panel for you today, which they will introduce themselves as a group, but the Central Florida Freethought community is just proud to host today's event on behalf of several Florida organizations, and that is due in large part to Sarah Levin's encouragement for us to kind of get the word out and do this. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction of the organization, and then they're going to take it away. So we're live on Zoom and streaming onto YouTube, so thanks for being here however you are able. And I want to introduce Leonard Pressburg. He is a school board member from Fayette County, Georgia, and he's also the founder and president of the Association of Secular Elected Officials. So the whole hour is in your hands.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Leonard Pressburg from Fayette County, Georgia, just south of Atlanta. And so happy to be here today to present to you Representation Matters, Secular Elected Officials Speak Out. That is on behalf of the Association of Secular Elected Officials, the Center for Freethought Equality, and Secular Democrats of America. This is, of course, a non-partisan event, but we're excited to be here. You will hear today about why it's important as secular people to get involved in the political process, and then some things you can do with your groups and individually to help influence that process. So you'll hear today from Ron Millar from the Center for Freethought Equality, Danny Chiriki, who is a city council member in Billings, Montana. And I'm going to turn it over right now to Sarah Levin, the principal at Secular Strategies.
Hi, everybody. I want to really quickly thank the groups that are co-hosting us today, along with the Central Florida Freethought community, the Central Florida Freethought Society. Sorry, I always get society and community. Nope, I was right the first time. I'm sorry, David. I want to thank Humanists of North Central Florida for co-hosting, the Humanists of Tallahassee, as well as the Atheists of Polk County for co-hosting us today. Thank you so much for getting the word out to your members. We're trying to reach as many folks in Florida, which we know is a really, really key state when it comes to voter engagement. So reaching as many of you as possible is great. So I'm Sarah Levin. I'm Program Director, Secular Democrats of America. I also work very closely, of course, with the Center for Freethought Equality and Association of Secular Elected Officials. And I'm just going to get us started really quick with some background to contextualize the conversation for today. So probably a lot of you have heard about this already, so this is probably familiar to you, but it's important to remember that the religiously unaffiliated are the largest, fastest growing religious demographic in the country. This is from a pretty recent, just a few weeks ago, poll that came out from Gallup showing that for the first time in American history, less than 50% of Americans are now attending church. And as you can see from this first slide, a huge portion of now about 1 in 4 Americans who are unaffiliated are millennials. And we now know, we have enough data to show that this idea that young people, they'll just get more religious when they're older, that's not actually happening. We have the most secular generation of voters we've ever seen, and it's going to continue that way. So this is great news, but the problem, of course, is that we're still severely underrepresented in government. This is the makeup of the current Congress, where you can see only 1% of Congress are unaffiliated. There is one openly non-theistic member of Congress, which is Congressman Jared Huffman, one of the founders of the Congressional Freethought Caucus. We also have Congressman Raskin, who doesn't identify as a non-theist per se, but he does identify as a humanist. And the Congressional Freethought Caucus now has, I believe, 15 members. most of which are members of faith, which is great. It's wonderful to have faith allies who will stand up for the rights of non-religious people. But representation matters, right? That's the theme of this presentation. And as you can see here, this is another way to look at the breakdown of representation in Congress. The unaffiliated have the largest gap between our representation in the general population and our representation in Congress. And you can even see here that there's a lot of over-representation of other religious groups in Congress. So you've got 55.4% of Congress are Protestant, while only 43% of Americans are Protestant Christians. You have over-representation of groups like Jewish Americans, for example, with a 6.2% of Congress representing Jewish people when they only make up 2% of the population. And so and at least there is a little bit of a gap here, but when you get to Buddhists, Muslims, Hindus, that the gap is not even close to as large as this, when you have 0.2% of Congress here representing 26% of the population, which is growing. And so a lot of what you're about to hear is about how you as an individual and you as a member of your various local groups can make things change, can change this, right? There's a lot of things we can do to mobilize and get more elected officials like Councilmember Chiricki, who you're going to hear from, and Leonard, who serves on the school board, elected to office. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Danny.
Hi there. So why should we get engaged in the electoral process? I think the single most important reason is that it's our values that are actually under attack by the literalists and the ideologues in the religious conservative nativist coalition. We continue to have the values and skills that once made America the shining beacon on the hill. It was our values and American pragmatism that created the largest economic middle class in the history of human civilization after World War II, and we can do it again. So how? Let's go to the next slide, Sarah. These United States are a secular humanist nation. We are an experiment, not just in democracy, but in the values of the European Enlightenment, which was a resurgence of humanist values into the public sphere. Key among that was like a moving away from a dependence on gods and kings and much more onto the individual human experience. The founders of the American experiment were highly influenced by the European Enlightenment. And it was our values, these values, that built this nation in the 18th century, created the Progressive Era movement, which in New York City created the Ethical Culture Society at the end of the 19th century. And moving into the 20th century, we've seen, many of the fraternal organizations of the 20th century are humanist in value, as well as many of the Christian churches. So how did we get to this point in history? Cultural war. I blame it all on Rush Limbaugh. The conservative cultural war is against humanist values, specifically the classical liberal values, which we inherited and have continued to evolve since this began in the 18th century. How did this happen? In my opinion, it began with William F. Buckley's master's thesis, God and Man at Yale, where Buckley, viewing the American pragmatism of the post-Depression, post-World War II era, recognized that both of the parties at that time were contesting over the center. Both of them were being driven by Enlightenment values. Buckley, a conservative, argued that the only way that conservatives could come back to power was to push an ideologically driven, rational argument-based movement that could counter that pragmatism because it was separated from reality. This is why that phrase, reality has a liberal bias, has some truth to it. So you add in decades of Rush Limbaugh and Fox News, And you now see what has changed in America's views about politics. So yes, in politics are very, very important. But if we only engage at the political level, we have been losing and we will continue to lose, because we've lost the cultural change war, and we need to start fighting back. We need to start changing the narrative that drives American politics. And we need to be committed to undoing those changes and finding and promoting narratives that are in sync with our secular humanist values. So why do values matter in today's world? We are critical thinkers. We're often trained in science, in the liberal arts, or in results-oriented businesses. We respect the defining phrase of the year 2020, follow the science. More importantly, we respect the human experience and allow it to refine and support human thought. The human experience was defined by philosophers, natural philosophers, and became the philosophy of science. Secular humanism valued, secular humanism values the entire human experience: history, art, culture, music, literature, as well as science and ethics. So basically, while rational arguments are good for or against a specific policy, that's nice, but data matters. As an anonymous statistician once said, and excuse the phrase, "In God we trust, but all others must bring data." What we want to know as secularists is, did it work? We respect the science and we pay attention to the outcomes instead of ideology. So we are also much more likely to look for the root causes of systematic problems. We're also more likely to implement solutions that are uncovered by an analysis, a root cause analysis, looking for the systematic problems. Probably the single best example right now on a national scale is that the politics of the right and the Second Amendment types have refused to allow the federal government to collect data on gun usage and crimes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we cannot have good data-driven policy if we don't collect the data. So political change is absolutely about electing the right people. But in order to do that, we have to change the way people vote. It's important, so changing the narrative is very important. That's a huge part of what we need to do. And groups like yours have been actively involved in trying to do that at your local community. And I applaud the work that you're currently doing. But we need to step it up a notch. As a group, you need to consider what else you can do in your community. And running openly secular pro-science candidates is one of those options, whether or not you have a good chance of winning. Running candidates a great way of saying, hey, we are here. Our values matter. What we believe matters. This is an important step, in my opinion, in fighting back. So we have to continue to work on changing the narrative, both culturally and politically. And secondly, we also need to think about and work on systemic radical change to the election process itself. As Emma Goldman is often falsely attributed as saying, if elections worked, they'd make them illegal. What's actually happening is that they have made elections ineffective. If you stop and you think about it, we are all abuzz right now about how, elections are not working, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we're not talking about the real problems. One really good video on this is a TED Talk by Catherine Gell. US Politics Isn't Broken, and I'll put the link to it into the chat box in a moment here. But her basic argument is that the system is designed to keep the two major parties in power, and it's skewed to the extremes of those two parties, which is making it much harder to do policy in the center, which is where most of us live. So her problems and the things we need to look at: winner take all elections, political party primaries, obviously the effect of money on the entire system, and the solutions we need to be thinking about and trying to figure out how to make it happen at our local levels. Some form of ranked choice voting. There are a number of really good options that are out there. Ensuring that news channels, anything that wants to brand themselves as news, follows standard journalism ethics, and limiting the role of money as a way of access to power. These are systematic changes that what we need to do, that need to happen. I hate it when I screw up my closing line. How voting matters. Voting, making these changes will have to happen by us voting the right people into office in order to make it happen. So how do we do that? I'm handing it off now to the political coordinator, Ron Millar, from the Center of Freethought Equality. Ron, take it away.
Thank you very much, Danny. I'm Ron Millar. I'm with the Center for Freethought Equality. I'm the political impact coordinator there. Our political action committee is called the Freethought Equality Fund. And I want to talk about how, as individuals and as atheist and humanist groups, we can become more involved in the electoral arena. And just to reemphasize a little bit of the why, we also want to be involved because it builds visibility for us as individual atheists and humanists, and also for our groups, and that helps get rid of that bias that still exists against us. And it also helps build relationships both within your organizations, because you're doing work that people are excited about. You're building relationships with the larger community, and you're also building relationships with the electoral arena, the power players within the local politics and national politics. And all this comes about to increase the clout of our community. But we're not doing that just for the sheer notion of building our political clout. I mean, as Sarah was talking about, our population is increasing dramatically. And now we have the potential to challenge the Christian nationalists that are far too entrenched in our political system. And we can be the political force that fights against their anti-democratic, bigoted, anti-science, racist, misogynistic, and homophobic crusade, and bring it to an end, and to help build a society that we're proud to live in. So all that said, what can we do as individuals and groups to become more involved? So next slide, please, Sarah. So you want to exercise your political power, and you only have political power if you demonstrate it. So we'll go through each of these bullets in a little more detail, but primary, register to vote, be an informed voter, attend candidate forums and events, invest in your preferred candidates, educate the folks you know, vote in every election opportunity that you have, meet with your elected officials and re-elected officials, get involved in your preferred political party, know what your government is doing, and then run for office. So next slide. The most basic thing is to vote, and you can't vote unless you're registered to vote. So Florida just passed some sweeping voter suppression laws, and I'm sure they're going to be signed by Ron DeSantis. They want to challenge Georgia in being the most, in voter suppression on the fake big lie that Trump won the election. So know what's happening with your voter laws. Stay on top of it so your vote doesn't get eliminated. So the key is to stay registered to vote. If you move, make sure you re-register at your new location so you don't lose your opportunity to vote. And you can do it online. I think Florida has the 29-day before an election, that you have to make sure your voter registration's up to date. So stay on top of that, vote and stay registered. Next, there's a lot of resources out there to help you be an informed voter. They're both partisan and nonpartisan. The nonpartisans are Ballotpedia, Project Vote Smart. They all have excellent information about what elections are coming up, who's running. One of the best ones, of course, is the League of Women Voters, Vote 411. It's an excellent resource. And then for your partisan interest, think about the issues that are of concern to you, and go to those action funds, whether it's abortion rights, the environment, church-state separation, LGBT rights. and see what, who those folks are looking at, what elections they're looking at, so that you become an informed voter. Because, when you go to vote, you just don't randomly select the buttons you fill in. You want to know who you're voting for and why. Next slide. One great way to know and learn about candidates is candidate forums and events. So when you have an opportunity, please go to these when we get back to in-person meetings, and you can still do online forums and events. It's a great way for you to ask questions that you want the answers to with the candidates. And when we're back to in-person, it's a great way too to increase our visibility. Wear your atheist and humanist t-shirts and other swag so that members of your community and the candidates know that there is an atheist and humanist constituency out there. And if you invite friends to do the same, they'll soon think that we're a movement, which is what we really want to be. We want to be a movement. We want to be a recognized constituency. And when you go to these events, post photos and videos about your encounters, especially if you're asking questions, you can post what the feedback was from the candidates on the questions that you ask. Next slide. So once you've decided which candidates you want to win, you got to create a budget and invest your time and money to make that happen, because campaigns live and die on the funds they receive and the volunteer hours they're able to expend. So invest wisely. And there's lots of things you can do as a volunteer. Door knocking, phone banking, texting is very popular now to reach out to voters. And again, as you do this, and you make sure that you're doing it when the volunteer coordinator, make sure that they know that you're an atheist and humanist, that our constituency is important. Recruit other people to do it and come with you to help out. Next slide. So you've done all this research. So don't keep that research to yourself. Educate your friends and families about the candidates that you want to win, and make sure that they are registered and are going to be voting on election day. So again, it's a great way to share the information with your friends, families, colleagues, neighbors, and get them engaged in the campaigns too. If you do this, you'll soon become an opinion leader within your community. And then before you know it, people will be coming to you to ask about the candidates that they should be supporting. So do the research, educate folks, and be known that you have this information available for people. Next. So it doesn't matter unless you vote, and get people out there to vote, and vote in every contest. Don't just do it once every 4 years in the presidential election, because local politics matter. In fact, local politics drive more of your day-to-day quality of life than national politics. So, know what elections are happening, vote in every contest that's available to you, and be an informed voter in every contest that's available to you. And also with local elections, turnout is usually much lower. And so your vote has more power, and even more power if you organize other people around you to go out and vote for your preferred candidates. So please vote in every contest. Next slide. So once the election is over, your job is not over. Your preferred candidate wins. Make sure you follow up with them. Make sure that they perform on the issues that you're concerned about, and that the reason why you helped elect them to office. So stay engaged. And again, this helps build our visibility as a community, helps build your visibility as an engaged citizen within your government. Next slide. So let's talk about politically empowering your local atheist and humanist organizations. There's a misconception out there that nonprofit groups cannot be engaged in the electoral process, and it's just not true. There are two things you cannot do as a 501c3 nonprofit, and that's either endorse or appear to endorse a candidate for office, or endorse a political party. So, but you're very free to engage in civic education, to make sure that people know what's happening in the electoral arena. You can do all kinds of things like you're doing today. You're conducting a public education and training about the electoral process, completely allowable and a must do. You can educate candidates that are on issues that are important to you and your community. You can prepare candidate questionnaires and voter guides. You can conduct GOTV and voter registration drives, and you can sponsor candidate debates. So we'll talk about each of these quickly. The one thing is, I recommend a great resource. It's called Boulder Advocacy, BOLDER Advocacy. It's a great resource, walks you through all these things so that you do them absolutely correctly. And they even have an Ask an Expert thing that you can send an email or talk to one of their lawyers, all free of charge, to make sure that you do these things as allowable for a nonprofit organization. So look up Boulder Advocacy and work with them. All right, next slide. So again, be that civic voice for both your organizations and your community. Make sure that your members are registered to vote. They know, the educational materials from Ballotpedia, Vote 411, Project Vote Smart. So this way, your membership is educated in the electoral arena and will have more confidence to go out there and vote and become more visible for the atheist and humanist community. Next slide. One great way to educate candidates about your organization and about us as a constituency is simply write candidates a letter or an email telling them what your group does and the issues that are important to you. This reinforces that we're a constituency, talks about the values that we hold and the issues that are important to us. Again, this is nonpartisan. You're not endorsing any candidates. You're merely educating candidates and just making them aware that we exist, which, quite frankly, most candidates don't know that we exist at this point. Next slide. So once you're comfortable sending out that letter or email to candidates, you can add to it a questionnaire, actually asking them, how they stand on the issues that are important to your organization. The religious right or Christian nationalists, whatever you want to call them, have been doing this for over 5 decades, so they're well ahead of us, but we have to catch up. Like I say, we can challenge their political clout, and now's the time to start organizing to do that. Again, use Project Vote Smart so that you do this correctly, but again, it's a great way to educate candidates, great way to get your members involved, and a great way to build community, both within your organization and outside of it. Next slide. There's another great organization out there to help you out on voter registration and get out the vote efforts. It's called Secular America Votes. They have excellent guides on both of these activities, and I'm sure they would love to come speak to your group about the services that they offer. So, in addition to the good feeling of being civically engaged, it's a great way, again, to build your group's visibility and build your group's membership. Next slide. I think the ultimate thing to be going towards is to sponsor or co-sponsor candidate debates. Again, this makes our community seen as a constituency that needs to be reckoned with. So, initially when you're starting out thinking about doing candidate debates, reach out to your interfaith or social justice allies to see what they're doing and maybe co-sponsor it with several other groups or other larger groups. Again, it's about building relationships. So not only are you building relationships with the candidates that are going to these events, but also the organizations that you're co-sponsoring with. And then perhaps once you get large enough, think about sponsoring them solely. So they're just speaking to the atheist and humanist community, again, seeing us as an important constituency and making them factor us into their policy stances. All right, so, we have the election. Your job isn't done there as an organization either. After the election, invite responsive elected officials to speak to your group. Invite former candidates to come speak to your group. The goal, again, of all these efforts is to build the visibility of our community, build relationships, and, be part of the political process within your community. This is all allowable within 50c3 status, and it's incredibly important if we want to challenge the dominance of Christian nationalists, who, as you know, are dominant in Florida, but they've had a 50-year head start. We start now. We can increase our clout and empower our community. So now I want to turn it over to Leonard, who'll talk to you about running for office. Thank you, Leonard.
Oh, excuse me. When people think about running for office, a lot of times people think that they need to have a certain amount of experience or a certain background or a certain knowledge set. But the truth is that's not true. Is anyone can run for office, and you know that anyone can run for office because you turn on the TV and you see that you see your governor, you see Ted Cruz. Like, if they can run for office, you certainly can run for office. As Danny talked about, the importance of having elected officials that share our humanist values, that share our values for rational decision making that helps the most people. I can't think of a better thing for any of the people on this call to do than run for office. So running for office is a complicated thing. There's lots of offices. So I'll talk a little bit about picking an office, a little bit about what your messaging might be, and a little bit about how one actually runs a political campaign. So we could go to the next slide, Sarah. So picking the right office, there are local offices in towns like mayor or city council, school board, county level offices, state level offices, obviously federal offices. But we're all sort of interested in different topics in different areas. So, if you're interested in the environment, you might want to look for, there are in Georgia, I know, water district positions up for election. There are, regulators of utilities. If you're interested in schools, there are school board positions, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these different offices all have different terms, different qualifications, different election dates, different ways you sign up, different rules. And so you have to start by doing some research with your local elections office, because depending on what office, for instance, here in Georgia that you want to run for, there's as many as 5 different places that you might have to go just to get on that ballot, just to be listed as a candidate officially. And when you do that, the changes different times of years, all sorts of things. So ballot access and what the rules are, what the term is, what the district is, where the lines are, particularly as we go into next year, when most offices in most places will have different district lines. It's crucial that you look at those. Often your local elections office can be a great source of information, or your local political parties. The other thing you need to look into is to see what your campaign disclosure rules are in your state. It's generally a different agency and a different set of rules than how you get on the ballot, but usually before you raise your first dime or spend your first dime, if you even want to put up a website, you need to check into what those rules are, because you might have to do some filing before you spend any money at all. If you're running for locals office, you often know what the local issues are. You can learn all about who the incumbent is and why you would be a better choice. And so all of those pieces of research, from the rules to the issues to the incumbent, you have to put that all together and come to your decision. If we can go to the next slide. And so, the first thing you got to do is get your family on board. If your family's on board, then you can do it. You think of, you read about political campaigns on the news and so forth. It seems like, there's all these staffers and workers and a campaign manager, fundraising person. Most campaigns are, a candidate and a spouse and a few friends sitting around a kitchen table trying to get stuff done. So, again, don't think that those things you read about in the newspaper are the standard for most races. Campaigning is hard. Obviously it's the most public thing you will do. It is literally putting your name out there on a ballot. And so, it's also a very private thing, because as a candidate, you're sort of always on show and running. So make sure you have your family support and reach out to your network, the people you hang out on Sunday afternoons with, in your in your humanist groups, and think about your friends and your family, and put together a little network of people, 5 or 6 people, and bounce the idea off of them, and then chances are they're going to be really excited to encourage you to run. So go for it. There is so much benefit personally and for the community to make that decision to run. Even if you think, I live in the most conservative place, there's no way any Democrat could ever get elected here, or there's no way an atheist could get elected here. First of all, you might be wrong, but second of all, there is a tremendous benefit to the community in deciding to run regardless. You get to control the narrative, you get to talk about the issues that matter, and it does make an impact on state and national offices in terms of sort of a trickle up effect, because that helps those candidates when local candidates get involved too. So we'll go to the next slide. So you're ready to run. So, a lot of times when people run and they first start speaking to groups, they talk a little bit like a resume. They give qualifications and experiences, but really what you want to do is you want to have a really awesome, half a minute to a minute elevator speech that tells a story, answers a question: why is our community going to be better off with me in this position? It communicates the values that we've talked about that are important and that are important to you. And it's important that that message and that story that you're telling is authentic and reflects who you are. And I think one of the reasons we formed the Association of Secular Elected Officials is not only to increase those numbers that we saw at the beginning from Sarah that are so skewed, but to encourage the hundreds of secular people who are already elected across this country, but don't do a lot of authentic talking about those values and that importance to them. And so we want to be able to band together and give people support and encouragement to be their authentic self, because as Sarah again went over, the population is changing and the electorate is changing, and that's what young voters are most likely to connect with. So let's go to the next slide. And so you've got your elevator speech, you're ready to run, you're on the ballot. You need just a campaign plan, and that's getting that message out to the right number of voters and having enough resources to do that with. So you can go back and look at past elections and see how many people voted for mayor of your town the last time there was an election. And you can go back a few election cycles and get some idea of how many people you think you're going to need to get to vote for you to win. That's called your win number. And then you go about trying to contact enough people so that you can get to that win number, right? That takes money. Fundraising is the #1 least favorite activity of most first-time candidates. It's because it's usually uncomfortable to people. We are not used to calling others up and asking them directly for money. And what's important when you're doing fundraising is to understand that you're not calling people up to just ask them for a gift. You are calling them up to get them to invest in your community through your campaign, right? They are working for those values to work to make the community better. They're not just giving you a handout. You try to target the voters you want to talk to. If you know the members of that Baptist church on the corner probably aren't going to vote for you regardless of how many times you talk to them or how nice they are, then it's probably not worth spending your campaign time going out there to talk to them. You want to talk to the people that are going to help get you to that win number. And there's a whole hierarchy of different ways of talking to people, right? There's meeting them face to face, whether at an event or knocking on their door. You can call people up. You can send them direct mail. You can send them a robocall. You can put up a billboard. You can put up a yard sign. And how you choose to contact people is really going to be up to your individual circumstances and preferences and what you think is best. There's a lot of information out there about which methods are best and how to spend money. And it's a little bit as much of an art as a science in terms of a lot of things. So you figure out how you want to get out in front of that number of voters, and then all you have to do is do it. It's generally a nice thing about a political campaign is it's a time thing. You know how long exactly it's going to last, and you can plan out, a few months to do it, because there's, like I said, a lot of benefit to you and the community to get out there and be authentically secular in the political arena. So that was a little quick run through of, why and what and how it's important to get involved. And we would love to open it up for questions either on the presentation, or if you have other questions about serving as a secular elected official, or anything else we might help you with in terms of what we've talked about. Or if you just want to say hi, get your few seconds of YouTube fame, we can do that too.
Looks like we don't have questions just yet, at least from the YouTube stream. So I'll just, and while we're waiting for questions to come in, I'll just add something real quick about joining your political party. And this is nonpartisan. I happen to do organizing with secular Democrats, but whatever party you're in addition to running for elected public office, you can also run for positions in your political party. And you'd be surprised how often that can be pretty easy. And a lot of times there's recruitment happening for those kinds of positions. And a lot of times we're talking about very, sort of boring kinds of jobs, right? You might have, that involve a lot of administrative work, but also exciting like field work to get Democrats or Republicans or whatever party you're part of involved in your community. But that's where a lot of candidate recruitment happens. That's a lot of where the agenda and priorities of the party are set. It's a great way to influence the culture of your party. And so if you can bring your secular identity into your politics, into your political party, because really secular values should be nonpartisan. We're talking about values that are based on the Constitution. So that's a great way, if you don't want to run for public office, a more behind the scenes way to also have influence on our political class as a community is to also join your local political committee, check it out and see if maybe they have positions open. Both at the local level, but there's also often a statewide executive committees for your state party as well. So just wanted to throw out that opportunity to get involved. And here's a question for the panelists from Jocelyn. Share something inspirational that you experienced as a candidate and or elected official. I want to start with you, Leonard.
So, it's not a specific experience necessarily, but I do fairly frequently get people who approach me and thank me for being authentic and tell me that, that even though they're religious, right, they're not that mean kind of Christian nationalist, and that they, that they do believe in our public sphere being a secular public sphere and being open to everyone and all people. And, we forget in the political climate that we're in that that's actually the majority, the vast majority of Americans who want to live in that public society.
Yeah, I would add two things to that thought. One, probably the most entertaining moment I had was, so as a member of a city council, we do a prayer at the beginning of the meetings. And one of the things that I've been doing is just kind of telling little history lessons instead of prayers and stuff like that. So I gave a very short 2 minutes description of Semmelweis at the very beginning of the pandemic, and it was very interesting. The people who came to me afterwards and said that they had never even thought about the history of how we discovered germs and that entire medical story that goes on in all of that. And the other thing I would just kind of, emphasize what Leonard was saying. If you really stop and think about it and take it apart, the biggest part of what's happening right now in America is being driven by television. It's going, it's getting echoed and repeated in social media and all that kind of stuff. But you have a whole group of people who are saying things on television, and everybody is focusing on that and repeating that. And if you actually, sorry about that. I'm starting another meeting at the same time. But if you pay attention to what's going on with that, it is a we need to figure out how to counter that. And if you actually talk to people and get into the details of various different issues, especially local issues, you'll find that most people are really in the center. It's the wedge issues that are being pushed by the national media that is making so much of politics unpleasant and crazy these days. You get down to, funding for parks or, paving streets or water systems or, the health of a local community. People pretty much agree on those things. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind.
I'm going to tell a quick story that's not mine, but it's of another elected official at the local level in Pennsylvania, who is now the acting chair of Secular Democrats of Pennsylvania. And he told a story of writing an op-ed as an activist in the community about a church-state separation issue that had come up locally. And then later, when he was running for office, he was nervous about, whether that would come back to haunt him. And he was approached by someone who said, "Hey, aren't you the one that wrote that op-ed?" And he sort of braced himself. And then he said, "Yes." And they said, That's awesome. Thank you for writing that. Right. So I thought that was an inspirational story because he's in a very conservative area that he was running, where he was running for local office. And it's a story that goes to show that by being visible in your community, you can really, and while running for office, you can really bring people out of the woodwork who might not have otherwise shown themselves, right? Because they for the first time have someone that they know identifies with them and that they can approach and that they're being represented. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That's a story from Jacobson Titchko in Pennsylvania. And here's another question. I'm going to throw it to Ron first, because I don't know if you'll have these stats ready to go, but this is another question. What is the amount of re-election with candidates that identify as non-religious humanists? So how often are our incumbents winning re-election?
Well, we've been at this for a very short time. Prior to the 2016 elections, I think we had, I'm sorry, I'm getting ignore my other phone back there. We had 5 elected officials at the state level who identified with our community, and now we have over 60. So, our reelection rate is great. We've never had a candidate, be defeated when they came out and identified as atheist, humanist, or whatever identifier. In fact, even in the campaigns that we've been monitoring, only once has somebody been really attacked for being an atheist, and that was in Tennessee. It was a really red district that Gail Jordan was running in. She ran in 2016 against an incumbent. Religion never came up, and she lost that election. Then the following year, the incumbent took a job in the Trump administration. She ran in the special election that happened just the next year. And, the governor, lieutenant governor, head of the GOP, and her opposition attacked her for being an atheist. And she handled it really well. But at the end, she got a higher percentage of the vote when religion didn't even come up. So religion, being an atheist or human, hasn't come up as an issue in any of the elections, or at least a detrimental way, for the candidates that we've been endorsing and working with.
Great. Danny, do you have another comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say that in my elections, very rarely does it come up, but every once in a while I'll run into somebody who says, "Oh, you're the humanist," and then we get down and then, I immediately engage with them about, what that means and what they're afraid of in the conversation. And usually we just agree to disagree on it. But the other thing that I would say, just as a more direct answer to your question, I forget the man's name, but he was the representative for, Princeton University, the town of Princeton and whatnot. And he was a rocket scientist. And the reason I remember it is his bumper sticker was, for the reelection campaigns, was, "My representative is a rocket scientist, and yours?" And he got reelected very consistently until he decided he didn't want to be in the House anymore. So I think it's very doable.
So here's another question about social media. So how have you or other successful candidates used social media to their advantage?
Social media is very entertaining. I think one of the things that you need to pay attention to is that it's part of a generational shift. And what I'm seeing in terms of that generational shift here in Montana is that these are people who basically have been, excuse the phrase, screwed by the existing economic system over and over and over again and over the last 20 years. And they're starting to get pretty upset and angry. So I've seen it. I have not seen it used really well yet as an organizing tool in politics here in Montana. I know it's possible. We just don't have the people, I think, to make it really work. But one great example, after the 2016 presidential election, the women I knew who were on the Pantsuit Nation Facebook page here in Billings, Montana, they called a meeting. One of them called a meeting, and literally 300 people showed up in a church basement 2 days later. So it can work, and it can be really useful. And just in this day and age, with all the kind of information that's out there, it has to be a very strategic and well thought out part of how you use stuff. I mean, obviously you can just throw it out there in a shotgun kind of fashion, but it can be a very good targeted tool if you want to use it that way.
Yeah, I think people, particularly us old people, think that there's like some magic social media formula. And the truth is that social media changes all the time, and the rules about Facebook and what posts get seen change all the time. And you either have to get very, very lucky, or, be very intentional and targeted with what you're doing to have real success. And different platforms attract different users. So depending on the demographics that you're looking for instance, you wouldn't communicate with someone under the age of 40 probably with Facebook. You wouldn't choose to do that. You would have to learn something that we probably have never heard of.
But social media also factors into your network of supporters. In the same way that when you're fundraising, you go to that power network that you've built up by being involved in your local party, on commissions at the local level, the campaigns that you've worked on, other things. And so your social media also benefits from that network, because you put out a message, then it has to be strategy. You have to have your supporters amplify that message to get it out to bigger and bigger audiences. So it really just you can't create a campaign just on social media. You want to have that network of supporters first, both to help your campaign in phone banking, phone calling, reaching out to people, house parties, and then social media just feeds into that too.
I'll just add really quick that there is no silver bullet. It's like Ron said, you can't just run your campaign entirely on social media, but I do think it should be thought of as one really important tool that you can't not do in addition to other things. And it's usually because I've for years I try in my community organizing and in all my work, I ask people, how did you hear about us? And the frustrating thing is it's never the same answer. It's always a bunch of different things, which kind of means you have to try to be in as many places as you can. Some people, the fastest way to reach them is Facebook Messenger. Some people aren't on Facebook at all. Some, depending on the age range, they might be on TikTok, on Instagram, and some people are just email only. I worked with people who still use flip phones, to people who, will not respond to their emails, but will respond to a Facebook message. And you do need to reach everybody. So you kind of have to be knowledgeable enough to be in as many places as possible, because you need to reach many different types of people who are using different types of platforms. And, once you do that fundraising and start hiring staff for your campaign, it's going to be good to get volunteers or staff who understand the latest trends with the ever-changing algorithms of Facebook versus Twitter, and how often to post and how to reach your audience. There are people who understand that, who are social media savvy. And so that would be something that I would recommend to candidates, is to really look for volunteers or staff that are up on those trends, because it can make a huge difference. I know I've had a lot of success recruiting people for secular Democrats, for example, especially during the pandemic, entirely through social media. But you do have to have some sense of, how that works and how to effectively use those tools, because they are, at the end of the day, not solution, but just one of many tools. I'm going to ask maybe just one more. Well, there's a quick, I'm going to ask two questions. One is pretty straightforward. One was a question for Leonard and Danny. They wanted to know how long your campaign was and whether you announced a year prior, or how soon did you announce before you ran?
Go ahead, Leonard. Take a first shot at that.
Yeah, well, so my story is a little bit different than a lot of other stories, because there was a vacancy in the post that I hold in the middle of a term, and I was appointed to that post first before I ever ran. And so the first time I ran, I was already an incumbent. And so, I will speak sort of generally in that, some people think that, announcing first and making a big splash can, maybe chase other candidates out of the way. Other people think you should do it later. I mean, I think once you've made the decision that you want to run for a race, that's a public thing. I'm not sure there's really that much strategy to keeping it a secret, because, you want as many people to know that you're running as possible. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Danny?
My basic feeling is that the moment that you have a basic statement about who you are and why you're running, and a link in there where you can start getting donations and collecting names for volunteers and stuff like that, that's the moment you're ready to run. Because, it takes time to build that base. And just kind of getting back to the social media question for a second, if you look at, there's a concept that's probably 15 years old now from social media called 1,000 True Fans, and it actually goes back to like building a base of followers for a musical band, but the concept is still the same. Google that and you'll see some very basic common principles of how to build a following, and because that's what you have to do. You have to build that following, and the sooner you start doing it, the better off you are.
All right, last question, and I'm going to throw it to you first, Danny, because you're really involved in your local humanist community as well as being a elected official. So I think this really speaks to your work as well. Have the local humanist communities grown as a result of this visibility? And I think by this visibility, they mean the growing number of secular elected officials that are part of the association. It's kind of a chicken or the egg question. Or is more elected officials leading to more growth in the community, vice versa? How is that working together?
Yeah, I would say that the one thing that has happened that is very encouraging for me is that some of the people who I've met over the last year and a half, in the younger generations, I may not look it, but I'm at the tail end of the boomer generation. So to all of the non-boomers out there, I apologize for what my generation has done to you. But that said, we haven't been able to pull them in and get them really active in the humanist movement, but we have gotten them involved in some other things that I think are really important. I mean, across the board, and another question that was asked earlier, about what you can do, the League of Women Voters, wherever you are, is probably aging out, like most groups are aging out, and all of those public organizations, those public facing organizations are really important to community, and helping them out is a really important thing to do. And that's really been kind of my goal, is finding out what people's passions are and pointing them and getting them involved in community organizations. But yeah, it's helped us maintain the humanist group during the pandemic, but I haven't seen a huge uptick yet. But I haven't really played it really heavy either.
Leonard, Ron, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the pandemic has changed a lot of organizing and obviously all sorts of community events have basically not happened for a year, and so that's certainly been hard, and it is a little bit of a chicken and egg thing, but it's also a generational thing, and as many civic organizations are aging and are looking for new leadership. That's also true of humanist organizations and political organizations and all sorts of things. It's I think related to that.
I'm sorry, I do have to bounce at this point and get my local humanist group going. I hope you're getting sunshine down there in Florida. We're not. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Danny. We're about to wrap. Ron, I have just one quick response to that last question. But do you have any thoughts on the question?
Well, I mean, when we have respected political leaders identify with our community, again, it reduces the bias against us. People feel more free to identify publicly because they see somebody like Jared Huffman in Congress say, okay, he's just a regular guy, and he identifies with my values, my beliefs. And so it eases that and lets more people identify. I mean, when we helped him announce in Congress in 2017, he had elected officials come to him saying, that's so brave. We want to be supportive. Again, it recognizes us as a constituency, as a valid constituency, and frees up people who had hesitancy about us.
I would just add here that in my personal experience, especially with my work with Secular Democrats of America, I have noticed that there are people who may not be interested, or because of what, maybe they have young kids or their situation, they may not be interested or may not be able to make it to sort of the traditional humanist community that we maybe think of, that maybe isn't actually as up to date, but we think of, the once a month and the lecture series and that sort of thing, getting together in sort of a social or educational way. And we don't think of humanist groups as, and although we should be, as being sort of advocacy hubs. But a number of humanist groups are starting to change that. And I think that really helps a lot, because there are people that is what they're going to spend their time on. In fact, they're already spending their time on that. With Secular Democrats, we're pulling from humanist and atheist communities, but we're also pulling from people who are Democrats, who happen to be atheists or humanists, but are not part of those communities, who are drawn in because they now have a space to be both at the same time. And that's why I think one of the things, in addition to what Ron said about, the increased visibility really helping for people to say, oh, look, okay, that there's someone who represents me, and that can be really inspirational. But in terms of growing local communities, adding political advocacy to your group, of course, it has to be in a nonpartisan way. And Ron mentioned a number of ways you can do that earlier in the presentation, but also outside of, the C3 groups, starting political groups, whether it's, and they don't always have to be that formal. Last year, there was a group of humanist organizers who are part of a 501c3 locally, who outside of that organization got together just as a group of individuals who happen to be both humanists and Democrats, and they organized a virtual fundraiser called Humanists Flip the Senate. And they raised $6,000 in one night for Senate races, right? So that was a great way to bring together, okay, we already know each other through this community and we share these values and we happen to be Democrats. Let's bring that together all in one and be humanist Democrats. And in my personal experience, I have gone to local groups before to talk about political advocacy and have the organizers afterward tell me, hey, these few people that showed up, I've seen them lurk in our meetup forever. And this is the first meeting they went to, right? Because the people who showed up happened to be people who wanted to talk about advocacy, wanted to get involved. And I think that's especially a continuing trend since 2016. There's a lot of people sort of waking up to the fact that they can't be on the sidelines politically. So I'd say absolutely adding advocacy, both nonpartisan advocacy that we talked about earlier, to the kinds of things our group does can actually grow humanist and atheist communities in sort of the traditional 501c3 sense. But there's also a great opportunity to grow our community in either partisan or just not, more explicitly political spaces as well. And that was the last question we had time for. So I just want to thank our hosts again, all the local groups who got together, and thank you to David. And certainly for anyone here, and I know David and Jocelyn, obviously you have really great relationships with your local legislators, but really anybody, especially if you know folks who may not know about the association, who are local elected officials, who are on your school board, please do let them know about the association so they can join. Leonard, do you have any closing thoughts?
Just again, thank you for having us. Feel free to reach out. I know David put some links in the chat. If you have any questions or want to reach out for any reason, we are here to help. So thank you so much.
You bet. And I want to thank you all individually for being here. And of course, we know this is a young organization. We're happy to see you jumping off the ground, and we hope to see you back here in front of us again soon. Thanks to Leonard for the inspiration to everyone who's, I'm sure, participating, due in large part to your advocacy, and also to Danny for joining. Of course, always our good friends Ron and Sarah, who we see a lot but never enough of, and even down here in Florida sometimes. So I'm going to turn off the stream here in a second, but I just wanted to get that thank you out, and then we'll have a chat for anybody who wants to stay on.